This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jim McDonald. Unfortunately, Jeff Stedman was not able to join us today, but I'm joined by a fantastic guest, Jeff Margolies. He is the Chief Product and Strategy Officer at Saviynt. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. We last spent time together at the ITDR at the Grapevine Gartner IM conference. What did you think of the event? Was it your first ITDR?
It was actually my second ITDR. I happened to attend one in Berlin a couple of years ago around the EIC conference. But first one in the US, and it's a great event.
Yeah. Shout out to Espen Bago, who's like the ITDR godfather, if you will. What was your takeaway from the ITDR? I mean, what's the state? Can you get a state of the industry, or was it just a good time to, have a beer and talk shop?
It's a great place to talk shop. I see these events a little bit like reunions sometime. Maybe not a family reunion, but I feel like identity is a bit of a family. And so getting the opportunity at conferences like Gartner Identity or RSA or EIC, and then, maybe more specifically at the ITDR events, it's just great to see everybody in the industry, to see old friends. I mean, some of the people there, I go back to almost 3 decades. And so it's fantastic to reconnect with colleagues.
Yeah, it's a great community. So many people and so many relationships that you build, like you said, over decades. It's not even just over years. And that's one of my favorite things about it. So you've been in this industry for a couple of decades. It's kind of surprising we've never had you on the show. We're getting off toward 400 episodes. But I was wondering if you could kind of follow our tradition, let us know how you got into identity. Did you choose it, or did it choose you?
I would say it chose me. I started my career at Accenture as a consultant in the security practice. I was a goofy consultant, or a goofy major. I was quantum electronics, electrical engineering. Accenture didn't know what to do with me, so they said, go figure out that security thing. And so I found myself in the security practice, and it was probably my third project where I really started to get into identity. Did network security first, and that really rolled into more directory activity, and that directory led to more single sign-on, web access control. So it was probably 1998 when I did my first identity-specific project as part of a larger security implementation. And strangely enough, that project, we did role engineering, we did privileged access management, we did identity governance, we did fine-grained entitlements. We did the whole gamut of identity security before there were any tools, before there were any, anything other than our, Perl and scripts and building our own apps and doing things like sudo and that got into building up a practice at Accenture. So I wrote the first PowerPoint where we sat and deliberated, what are we going to call this thing? Is it identity? Is it identity management? Identity and access management? We narrowed in on INAM, and basically built that practice from a PowerPoint presentation up to 700 plus people, over a period of 8-9 years. So that's how I got my career started. But then I kind of went on and did cloud security and cyber defense and broader security things, particularly in the financial services industry, high tech. So that's probably why we didn't meet for a while, because I left and then I came back to identity about 5 years ago when I came to Saviynt.
Yeah, so tell us about that. What drew you back to those space?
Yeah, it was a few things. One, I live in Los Angeles. Saviynt's headquartered in Los Angeles. There aren't a lot of security companies in Los Angeles. And so, having a local company to work at, particularly in the beginning of COVID, felt like a just amazing opportunity. The leadership team here with Sachin and Ahmed and others have been just people I've known and admired for a long time and was excited to come work with. And then I think identity, I wasn't done. Right? This problem is just still out there. Our customers are still struggling to solve this problem, and it felt like something that I really had something to add to and could come back and make a difference.
Yeah, normally what I'd ask you now is like you're the chief product and strategy officer at Saviynt. What does Saviynt do? But I'm assuming most of the folks who are listening to this podcast know that. Um, I guess the bigger question is like, how is Saviynt changing with all that's going on in AI? And I'll compound the question. So, how do you see AI affecting the identity security industry? Obviously, it's affecting everything around us, right? I mean, you can't go anywhere without talking about AI, but bring it home to folks in the identity industry.
Yeah. Well, for those playing buzzword bingo, right? We hit it at about the 1 minute mark for AI. Yeah. I think the way that AI is changing identity, is profound, right? So, um, the way I think about AI, it's helping people do things that are hard to do, make it easier to do, helping people do things that are very repetitive, do them over and over again. And there are a ton of areas in identity that are still very manually intensive, that still require a lot of very deeply skilled people, and that still require just a lot of information in order to solve the problem. So um, take the end user example. Like we make users and managers and the business, we make them make decisions all the time. Can this person have access to this thing? What should all of your salespeople get access to? We ask these questions, and if you think about the LLMs and their ability to help you get more context and really help ease the cognitive burden on the deciders, so they have a lot more information to make a good decision. So I think that's one area that we've really focused on is improve the decisions that humans make by giving them more data, but giving them in a way that they can consume it, and ultimately reduce your risk and be more compliant because you're making more effective decisions. I think another area is stuff that's just a lot of labor. You're in the consulting industry. I spent a lot of my career in the consulting industry. Historically, identity projects were 5-to-1, 4-to-1, 3-to-1 services to software. So anytime you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on software to solve an identity problem, you're also spending millions of dollars on services to solve an identity problem. And all of those things, from how do you configure the software, how do you integrate it with all of your systems, it's just a lot of work. And AI is an area that can really start to give the consultants, give the implementers more tools to be able to do that job and do it more productively, and really start to solve a much broader problem. For example, like our customers on average have maybe 50, 60 apps integrated into their identity governance solution, but they have thousands of apps. And so, at giving them the AI tools to be able to integrate thousands of apps with maybe the same or even a little bit more people, much, much better ability to manage their identity security posture.
Yeah, I feel like so I do want to tap into services. So I've been in the services industry for a decade. Um, and you've seen it happen. I mean, from my first identity implementation, which was like you said, it was like services was a multiplying factor of software costs. And you've seen without AI that driven down to maybe it's a 1-to-1 ratio. And in some cases, it's much less. It depends on the company.
Yeah.
I wonder do you think AI spells the end of services?
I don't think so. I think that um, right now, if you want to do a Saviynt deployment or any product, you need to have a PhD in identity security, and you have to have a PhD in Saviynt or whatever that technology is. I think what AI will allow us to do is remove the need for that PhD in the technology platform. And so identity security people can do it. Now, there still aren't enough identity security people, let alone enough identity security people who know Saviynt. And so, the value of consultants and services is that you do the same project over and over and over again. Right? So you do it at company A, and then you do it at company B, then you do it at company C. There's still value, regardless of whether you needed to know the technology platform or not, in the fact that you've done this project multiple times for multiple customers and multiple industries, or maybe multiple customers in your own industry. You can be more efficient and help teach that company how to do it. Maybe the mix of resources changes a little bit. Maybe the nature of the work that you're doing changes. I absolutely believe that, what we do with AI is going to be different than what we did without AI. But I think the need for services is still there. It's just changing. For example, when I first was doing identity projects, we tended to do projects on Thor, which became Oracle Identity Manager. We spent a lot of time just installing software and installing databases and installing web servers and web app servers. And like 30% of the project was just the technical architecture. In a SaaS world, that all goes away, right? The SaaS company does that. And so you don't need the services people installing 50 OIM CDs anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's just done. But they can do more higher level work, more policy work, more change management, more process reengineering, more integration with all the application teams. And all of those things are still areas that will be work to do, aided by AI. And I think value in services companies who bring methodologies, who bring processes, who bring best practices, who have done that and it can de-risk your project.
Yeah. Being in this industry, I feel like the challenge is going to be with AI, we should be able to do more for the same money. I mean, I feel like that's always been a restriction, is that you can only go so fast because you can only spend so much money. Well, if the software lets you go faster for putting in the same level of effort, whatever that equation looks like, you get more done. You connect more systems. You have more visibility. You can protect the enterprise better for the same investment.
Yeah, that's right. The cost benefit analysis, and we've changed the cost side of the equation to where the costs are much cheaper. And so, if you maybe only were integrating with 50 apps before, and the 51st one just didn't make sense, it was just too costly to integrate. Well, now maybe you flip that curve and it makes sense to integrate the 51st app and the 500th app and maybe the 5,000th app.
I wonder if anybody's asked you this question or in this way. Is AI going to kill software as a service? Because I think this is like one of those other views that you hear bounce around. Is like, you look at even the stock prices of some of the biggest software as a service companies, and they've been under pressure, whereas these AI companies are just, up and to the right, and their valuations are insane. And I believe me, this is not an investment show, and this is not investment advice. But I'm wondering, is that because people believe that everything will be done inside the large language model, and that you won't need software as a service, that HR processes, the CRM processes, and maybe identity security processes are all done within the LLM? And you see where I'm going with this? Does that make sense? Does that resonate at all? Or do you hear that from people? And what is your response?
Yeah, I will, quip sometimes that we have to transform from being a legacy SaaS platform now to being a modern AI platform. And if we decompose that quip a little bit, um, a modern AI platform is generally what we're all thinking about building. And so you build apps on top of a platform. We're going to have an identity security app or multiple apps on that platform. And that has a lot of things that we leverage from the SaaS world. But we also need to think about, what does the overall AI platform look like? What's going to run in the browser or on the endpoint? What's going to run in the customer's environments, whether that's a cloud environment or a SaaS environment, and then what's going to run in our cloud environment. I think that looks different than the SaaS world where you had browser and then a whole bunch of stuff running in the cloud. I think you're going to have some compute that shifts to the edge more, a lot more processing, a lot more of the AI agents are going to run in a more distributed fashion. And so that AI platform is probably going to be more distributed than the SaaS platforms were, just given the nature of where you want to do compute, where the data is, where you want your AI agents to be. All of that stuff is different. So the platforms will shift. I think it'll have a significant SaaS component, if I can call it that. But it's gonna change fundamentally from how today's SaaS apps look.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've given thought to even LLM and the prompt. It's like that, the user interface. It feels like we're back to the C prompt in some ways, but it has to be less structured. You remember the C prompt being that you had to put in the commands exactly right, whereas with an LLM, it interprets your misspellings and kind of what you might think. You can give it very little information, you give it a lot of information, but is the prompt the way of the future, right? Is that an interface that works for people? Is that an interface that works for businesses? Or, certainly 5 years ago, you never saw a SaaS rollout where it was just like, here's a box, just type in what you want. And maybe it was because the technology wasn't there, or maybe it was because that's not an interface that really is human friendly. I don't know.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of having a pretty nice or a pretty great design team that works for me, and I think there's still a lot of questions around what is the human AI interaction going to look like, and what's the model. Generally speaking, we've had more of like Microsoft Copilot sort of model, and I think they've done a great job from a design perspective of positioning both an ability to chat as well as show visuals and graphics and things like that on a different panel. And so, your interface of putting in commands like our old scripting C prompts were, in a more natural language, and maybe that evolves to be more voice and less command line over time. I still don't know, like, if I'm going to ever be comfortable talking to my computer versus typing at my computer. But
Right.
having that panel that's showing you graphs and visuals and images and much more rich sort of interaction, I think is still going to be how we interact. So some of the things that we're doing that look more like um, show me a graph of this, right? And rather than needing to know SQL and generate SQL statements, now I can just do natural language interface. I still want to see the graph. I want to see trends. I want to be able to get insights out of that data. I don't just want a stream of data coming in a command line, but I want to be able to tweak it and ask for it without needing to have that deep knowledge of SQL, or that, back to my PhD in Saviynt. I shouldn't have to know all of that technical junk. I should be able to just tell it what I want to see and have it show up.
That's right. So we talked about AI affecting software services. Probably the most important one is the practitioners. So I think we all hear the doomsday, the fear about AI is going to take all the white collar jobs. Then eventually we'll have robots and they'll take everybody's job. And everybody, I guess, will sit at home, watch TV, and eat bonbons all day or live a life of leisure. Who knows? It depends on if we get the Terminator come to life or we get some kind of oasis that comes out of this. It'll probably be somewhere in between. You're a girl dad. I'm a boy dad. My son is in cybersecurity. I mean, I'm telling you, he's going into his senior year. And I remember telling him at the beginning, like, is way more demand for cybersecurity professionals than there are jobs. That was 3 years ago. I think of, you know, sometimes I let the fear get to me. Maybe today I'd tell him, go be a carpenter. At least you have, 10 years before some robot takes over your job. That's probably too much fear, right? What do you think is going to happen? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the practitioner given where AI is and where AI is going to be over the next decade?
I think fundamentally I'm an optimist. As a technologist, I've always been driving change and driving new programs, and that's just, I think, fundamentally who I am. At any time in human history, as we brought on new productivity enhancing tools, like, I don't know, take the automobile for an example, right? That has vastly changed how our country is laid out, how any city is laid out. It's changed the nature of the jobs. There certainly aren't the buggy drivers and the horse farriers and all of that industry there were before, but it completely transformed our transportation, and has created tons of jobs that are out there, building cars, servicing cars, driving cars, whatever all those things are. And I think, in an AI world, we're going to have the same thing. We're not going to have as many buggy drivers as we did before. Whatever were the mechanics of maintaining the last version of these technologies. But we're going to have a whole bunch of new jobs, and new capabilities that we need to think about. Some of those, like I was talking about before, now we can factory onboard thousands of applications rather than dozens. So there's a whole bunch more work there to do. AI will help do some of that, but there will still be plenty of work for people to do. There's still lots of policy work to do. Take my example. Like most companies that have implemented or integrated with 50 apps, primarily those are 50 SOX apps, right? So financial apps, and then maybe a handful of high volume apps that everybody gets access to. Well, that's like one business process. It's the business process of how do we figure out who gets access to the critical financial applications and systems. Well, with 5,000 apps, now I've got lots of process I've got to figure out, and lots of policy I've got to figure out, and lots of different things that I didn't have to think about when I was just focused on SOX apps. And so there's lots of work for consultants and identity security people to really think about. So, fundamentally different jobs, but there will be more of them. And at the macro level, right? Macro level, more work, more things to do. At the micro level, what are our kids going to do? Well, they're not going to do the same jobs we did. Those jobs are probably gone. They're going to do some jobs you and I have never heard of, and it hasn't been invented yet. So it's tough. How I think about counseling my kids is make sure you're learning the foundations of how to learn, how to solve problems, how to do projects, how to work in groups. All of those things are super important skills to learn. And like I I was quantum electronics. I have not done anything with quantum electronics in my 30 years, but I learned how to think, and I learned how to solve problems and lead people and communicate. Well, maybe not communicate very well, but the rest of it I learned how to do.
Well, I went to school for political science. I got into identity and access management, and I use my political skills all the time. It's just something we all have to do in the work world, but not politics like Democrats and Republicans. But what I always advise my son is get whatever job you can working on cybersecurity and add value. Find a way to add value. We talked about AI for identity, or I'm sorry, AI for identity, how AI is going to change identity. But there's also identity for AI. How do we control this beast, or how do we manage how it uses, how would we provision access to it, making sure that it's only doing what it's supposed to do. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that angle, because I think that's going to be the great opportunity, the great job opportunity for that next generation of practitioners.
Yeah, you mentioned Terminator earlier, and I constantly think of this as, how do we make sure Skynet doesn't happen, or Skynet doesn't take control? So I think there's a couple things to it, right? Just in general, as you think about the identity problem as it exists today, I've got a user, they want access to an application or some system. I decide, okay, can they have that access? What level of access? Maybe at a granular level, which specific data sets or things can they see? And so we have policies that look like, all salespeople can have access to Salesforce for the systems they cover, or something like that, right? Or the accounts and customers they cover. All right, now I'm going to say salesperson and their agent can have access to that. And so now that agent can have access to Salesforce and all the accounts that the original human had access to. Or that agent can delegate to another agent that can delegate to another agent that could delegate to another agent that can ultimately get access to some subset of what I would have had originally. And we want to make policy decisions at each level of delegation to another agent. We want to be able to say, this agent doesn't have everything I want. I don't want to give that agent everything I have. I want them to have a specific amount to do a task. And then if they're going to delegate to some other agent, I want them to delegate a smaller amount that's just a specific amount. So we're applying a least privilege concept to agents as we're delegating authority down, n levels of delegation. And that's just a very different model, all happening at runtime, not in a delegated admin sort of model where we used to think about it from a administrative standing privilege perspective. We're saying, nope, I'm spinning up this agent right now. It has a task. It's going to go do something for me. And I only want it to be able to do this task and not anything else. And it's just a very different, a thought process, a different architecture, a different way of thinking about policies than we've had in the past. There's a tremendous amount of work going around in the industry on all of these different problems. And this is probably just one example of one area of identity security that we're going to need to think about for AI. We need to be able to discover it wherever it's being used and get visibility of all this AI and what everybody's doing, and make sure policy is being enforced, and make sure that we can identify and authenticate that AI and everything in between. That is is a challenge that is exciting, right? It's exciting to build a new set of identity capabilities, and hopefully not bolt it all on at the end like we tend to do in security. Let's try to. I don't know if we can get ahead, but at least run alongside of all the innovation that's gone on.
I think that framework that you mentioned, though, is as relevant today as it was 20 years ago, which is I can't give an access that I don't have myself, right? I can't spin up an agent and say, oh, you have access to delete the HR list. I can't do things beyond my control, and that, as it goes further down the line, it gets narrower and narrower and never broader. So I think that was one thing that jumped out that you said. But something else I kind of thought about is that, Jeff, you could stand up an agent that does many of the things that you do, like put your time in at the end of the day or whatever the example might be, but it can't show up in the system log that you did that thing, right? I mean, we have to have some separation or auditability that it was the agent, the AI agent made that decision or went out and did that thing, that it wasn't the human Jeff who did it.
Yeah, I think we need to maintain some level of provenance. Right? We need to know that that was an agent acting on my behalf. I want to know all of that. I don't want to just know it was an agent. Right? And to your point, I want to know more than it was Jeff. I want to know Jeff instantiated this agent. This agent did this thing. I probably want to know more information about that agent, like what LLM was it, and mostly try to figure out things like if something went wrong, how can I then go back and figure out, well, what went wrong? Did Jeff give a bad prompt? Did the agent hallucinate? Like what led to whatever the maybe identity security breach that happened here? What led to that breach, and how do I, figure out what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again?
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely. So I think AI and the agents, that's definitely one of the areas that identity is going to impact AI. And maybe this, I'm not sure which direction this one would go, but it's kind of like new use cases that AI is going to enable and maybe create at the same time, which is like, the example I think of is these deepfakes, because I think more and more authentication and what we do in the world is going to be via video and, whether it's identity verification or what have you. And the risk of having a deepfake, AI can enable the deepfake. AI can also potentially identify that it is a deepfake, right? So there's all these new use cases that identity is going to create for AI as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it'll be extremely difficult for us to play this arms race of AI detecting, malicious, fraudulent, whatever stuff. I think we actually have to do it the other way, which is we need to prove what's real and then assume anything that's not real is fake. And so on an identity verification perspective, that means that, we need to verify that, I'm really me and I'm not just some AI deepfake talking on this podcast. Right. And so, the identity verification capabilities that'll verify my government issued identity and me and come to some level of assurance that I'm actually me and I'm not some threat actor pretending to be me. Right. And then stamp that as real and then tie everything that I and all my agents do, to the fact that we verified Jeff was real at the beginning. Same thing with, I don't know, deepfake videos or deepfake images. Like we need the cameras to verify, like, I really took this in the real world and stamp that it's real and assume that any video we see that doesn't have a real stamp is fake.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
going to work.
Yeah. Right. It's kind of like, sounds like zero trust to me.
Yeah. Trust but verify. Yeah. Or
trust verify
first, trust later. Yeah.
Don't trust, just verify.
That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much going on besides AI. It can, with AI being such a exciting topic, it's easy to forget that there's so much going on with like ITDR, ISPM. What are some of the areas that you get excited about that you actually feel like they can change the game.
Yeah. I think posture, ISPM, visibility. I know we're all still as an industry narrowing on what the right words to use. I call it ISPM, identity security posture management. That's new, right? This is not something in the identity industry that was a core part of the stack, as it existed in the last generation of technologies. I think of it fundamentally as an AI. It is about, the AI that can see everything that's going on, and the algorithms that can detect malicious behavior that can really hunt in all of this vast amounts of data. And so, the old adage, you can't manage what you can't measure, has always been, I think, a challenge in the identity world. We just have not had the breadth and the depth of visibility that we need in order to manage the problem. We also haven't had the ability to maybe split, our roles and responsibilities between what's centralized and what's decentralized in a large enterprise. In many CISO organizations, they're not responsible for managing, governing, enforcing all of these identity security policies, but they are responsible for making sure that they're compliant, that they're managing their risks, that they're responding to threats, that they're helping helping the rest of the enterprise be efficient and effective in the application of those controls. So that first line, second line of defense. In the identity industry, we've only ever really had first line tools. And I think ISPM is a great second line tool. It's a great capability to be able to see, is everybody across all of my applications and all of my systems, are my policies in place? Am I compliant? Do I have risk? Am I effectively managing them? Am I under attack? Can I detect those threats? Like, all of those questions are like fundamental CISO questions that they haven't been able to answer unless they centralized it all and integrated with everything. And so it gives an ability to maybe have 100% visibility, but maybe only 10, 20% governance or enforcement capabilities. And I think that's a game changer. It kind of requires AI. It doesn't require AI. You could do this with kind of last gen technology, but I think it makes it a lot easier having AI to give you all that visibility, and then to run all those algorithms that you want to run to identify risk, identify threat, see compliance. So super excited with where we're all taking the industry, with ISPM and ITDR. And I think between those two, posture and then activity, are the key differences. Whether that's one product or multiple products, it doesn't really matter. I think they're all very similar. Like, collect a bunch of data, visualize the data, and actually get insight and be able to make decisions from that data.
Yeah. It feels to me like the identity industry, kind of what we do as practitioners, has expanded so much in the last, I'll call it 5 years. It went from administration and governance, access management, which we could just call authentication and keep it simple, and privilege access management. It's like, that was what identity was. And now you take posture management, which I'm a little less excited about myself, posture management, but I think the ITDR, maybe less about where it's at now, but where it's heading. I think about just kind of like shared signals, kind of that communicate. It's kind of like what's happening in the environment now, rather than setting things up to kind of the traditional lines of defense. To me, that mindset is just like a total game changer. And it almost, I've asked this question many times. So, does this expand the role of the identity practitioner? So, does the identity practitioner do more, or does it just make a bigger tent that the people who do these things now find themselves in the identity tent?
I don't know the answer to that. And I'll tell you why, right? I think that what ISPM and ITDR fundamentally do is they start to bridge traditional identity and security in the CISO. And so, what I can now do in my security context or in my security world as a CISO is posture gives me identity security context, right? So, and I have a goal here to get you more excited about posture. So I'll see if I can do that, right?
Okay.
If I'm in the SOC and I see an endpoint has maybe been compromised, with identity context, I can say, who has access to that endpoint? What could they potentially move laterally to compromise? And how can I shut down that lateral movement opportunity? How can I reduce the blast radius, knowing that this endpoint might be compromised? In order to do that, I need visibility of all the identities and all the assets they have access to, and that full graph, and be able to see that, and making that context available to a SOC operator, available to in that incident to be able to leverage, can help me be more effective and efficient in my response. So I think there's a ton of things that ISPM can make the security world more efficient, knowing that identity security context. So I think just that alone. Now that your question is that an identity security person that's now part of the SOC doing something different, or is that a SOC operator who's now got identity skills? I don't know. I don't know if we're going to create like an identity SOC next to a cyber SOC. I imagine no. But maybe some industries will say, of course we will. Think of our use case. And so it's quite possible that, it'll be a little bit of both, but it's now this merging of identity and security into a much closer, a collaboration than happened before. And the same thing with ITDR. And I think of ITDR as synonymous or able to do what EDR did to the endpoint security world, where you can only do so much if you're just protected, right? If everything is black or white, on or off, right? Either allow it or you deny it, right? There's only so much you can do. But once you start to be able to also detect and respond to things that might be unusual, you start to look into the gray and be able to make decisions around the gray that are not binary. And so if you start to look at that, from an ITDR perspective, it's really, okay, we're going to have to allow some things to happen. But if we actually are monitoring what's happening, we can start to look for malicious activity. And it's not just you have access or you don't have access, right? We're starting to look at the activity of what you're doing with that access, and then making runtime decisions about, whether or not something malicious is happening. And that's a game changer, I think, for identity.
So did you accomplish your goal? Yes. I mean, you got me thinking, okay, I sounded a little grumpy about posture management. It really just didn't help me make my case. So I kind of pushed it to the side. But I do kind of feel like within the space of identity, we take these cybersecurity capabilities, we tag some identity onto it and say, hey, this is, and then you go to identity conferences and everybody's talking about this new thing, identity XYZ, and it's basically something we're doing like penetration testing and scanning of the environment. But now we've got an identity angle to it. I sound grumpy. It's important. So I'm going to say you win. But here's the tough question for you. If you were hired as the CISO for an organization, they grew drastically and they've never had a security guy, or the security guy didn't really do his job. So they didn't have an administration. They had a tool for administration and governance. They had single sign-on, but it wasn't, that well done. They have some semblance of privileged access management. Maybe it's a spreadsheet, the password. I don't know. Do you spend your time fixing those things, or do you put in some of the tools that detect in real time, like my organization is under attack. I've got these posture issues. I've got, to get control in my master source, like my Active Directory, and an ITDR tool helps me do that. Like, which one do you do first? Do you try to do them both at the same time, or do you get your fundamentals, solid?
Yeah, I think more and more we're advising customers to start with posture. And the reason that I think that's important, it's really focusing on, where is the best business case, and basing that on data, right? And so if you're starting out with collecting a bunch of data, what is our current situation? What does our posture look like? Where do we have the biggest risks? Where do we have compliance issues? Where do we have ineffective controls or inefficient controls in place? If you can answer those questions from a posture perspective with data and be able to use that data to then plan out your roadmap, I think that's a much more effective way than using PowerPoint, spreadsheets, gut feelings, whatever it is that you're using to prioritize your initiatives now. Now, you're always going to come up with quick hits right away. I know this is a really big risk and it's a pretty low cost thing I need to get done. Right? And anytime you come up with a roadmap, you're going to have quick hits first, and then your more strategic things, and then stuff that you're probably never going to get to. And so maybe now, you say like, okay, well, I've got quick hits. I know I'm not compliant in this area. I know it's a really high risk. I know I just need to get that thing done and spin that off. You don't need posture to tell you can do that in parallel, or, maybe it's the second you get posture signal, you start doing it. But in general, I think, if you lead with posture now, you're really starting to make wise decisions based on the data and the information you have, rather than experiential decisions or just I'm doing this because I think
Feeling. Yeah. Well, like you said, you can't manage what you can't measure. So this episode's going to drop right around Valentine's Day, give or take. And I wanted to know what it is that you love about the identity industry, or what's happening in the identity industry, and what could make you want to break out with it.
Yeah, I think one thing I've always loved about identity, we talk about power and protect, or you can think about it as security and enablement. It is one area of security that really has a lot of impact on the end user in a way that a lot of other security doesn't. And I love the fact that we can spend a lot of time with the business, whether that's dealing with internal identities and what employees get access to, or your suppliers, or your vendors, or your business partners, or your customers, or your citizens, or whatever it is. I love the fact that identity interacts with that. And as a product guy, we spend a lot of time with who are the personas that we're building product for, and what do they need. It is unique, I think, in the identity world that some of our main personas are everyone, not just the security team. So love that about it. What makes me want to break up with the identity industry? Right now, not a lot. I think I'm still happily in love. I can't imagine what's gonna make me move on to the next thing, unless we just solve this problem and it's done, and then we can all move on to the next problem and solve that. It's hard to imagine that happening, but I'll punt and say like, no, I'm fully like happily in love with identity right now, and I can't complain.
You've been a great guest, so I'll let you take the easy way out on that one. But what I did want to ask you, so Saviynt has had a lot of success, especially over the past decade. And what I really want to know is what is the secret to the success of a company? So we talk to a lot of practitioners through this platform. It's I always think of practitioners as people who are in the trenches fighting the good fight. Whoever signs your paycheck, like you're trying to make identity work somewhere. And a lot of people who are founders for companies started in the trenches at some point, right? We always get that. How'd you get into identity story? And it's usually like, I used to edit LDAP files, or, I was a Java developer or something like that. And now they've taken their big idea and turned it into they've taken their passion and their big idea and turned it into their company. So what's your advice to them? If you could say this is one thing that you have to do to be successful.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing, it's kind of lame, but you got to focus on the customer and the customer problem. And as long as you're solving real customer problems and bringing value to them, I think that's the one thing. If I had a second thing, we're a company that is founded by and populated with practitioners. Right. So your point about starting with practitioners, we've all been doing identity. I'd love to see the stat of the number of years at Saviynt of identity. It would probably be in the millions of years of identity experience here, and certainly in the leadership team, it's well into the hundreds of years of experience of doing identity projects and helping customers be successful. And that mindset of, solve the problem for the customer, keep making it better and better, and make sure that above all else that they're successful. That's I think has been our biggest secret. If you do all that, the rest will come. Fame, fortune, glory, whatever you're looking for. That'll come as long as your customers are happy.
You have to build a great team. And Jeff, I really enjoyed those time with you today. We always like to end on a lighter note. We've been talking about AI and the potential Skynet. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you played the episode too fast. My lighter note question for you, like before we hit record, you mentioned your girl dad. You've got a 16-year-old and you bought her a Tesla, which is a pretty nice car. Think back to my first car, and it was a beater. And it definitely didn't have a big screen, but you chose a Tesla. And my lighter note question for you is like, why did you choose the Tesla?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. I have a Tesla. My wife has a Tesla, so it's a third Tesla. Now it is a used Model 3. And I think if you go out in the market right now and look at the best value cars and you aren't, you kind of, you can get past whatever political or whatever feelings you might have about Tesla and the ownership structure. It's a great car. It's a safe car. I don't ever have to worry about my daughter at a gas station. I don't have to worry about, her like getting her credit card skimmed at some, gas station credit card machine or, being at some place, dark. We're in the ecosystem. I have 2 chargers at home. She can charge, right next to me and my wife and don't have to worry about that. I can track her. Right? So I know where the car is at any given point. I know how fast it's going. I know what route it's on. So there's a lot of things that I can do that my car was a beater too when I when I was first driving. There's a lot of things you can do. I think as a parent, I can limit how fast it goes. I can limit how fast it accelerates. There are a lot of features that, as the parent of a 16-year-old, you look at that and say, yeah, okay, I can get my head around, spending a little bit of money for that peace of mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a 16-year-old boy and he has a BMW. It's actually a 7 Series, which sounds like, oh, you guys are rich. No, he got it for $10,000. So it was a great value, but that car has a lot of horsepower and 16-year-old boy with a car with a lot of horsepower. I just think of the stupid decisions I would have made. But I do think, I always think of this podcast like this is going to be a time machine or what do you call it, like a time capsule for our industry during this time period. And somebody will come back, maybe it'll be aliens or people from the future, listen to this episode and they'll be like, oh, Jeff got this right and that right, but he bought a car. Let's go look up what that means. Like people drove their own cars back then. That's crazy.
That's right. Yeah. I didn't do full self-driving for her. I use it all the time. But I want her to get better at driving first. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see by the time, their kids are around. Is she going to have a self-flying quadcopter Tesla? I hope so. I want to see it.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. We're going to close out this episode, everyone. Thank you for listening. If you want more, check out our website, idacpodcast.com. We're also on YouTube at idacpodcast.tv. Certainly connect with myself and Jeff Sedman. Jeff Margolies. So I get that right. I'm sorry if I keep mispronouncing your name, but
that's perfect.
Yeah, can people reach out to you on LinkedIn as well? Connect to you?
Absolutely. I'm at J Margolies.
All right, perfect. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.